Hello and welcome to another OmniFocus Fitness video. Today we're going to be discussing the health benefits of resistance training. This might be a lengthy video because I'll be going into a lot of different areas and sub-areas of the benefits of resistance training. This is not going to be an exclusively intuitive video. It's not just going to be resistance training helps you with muscle. Okay, well, I think almost everybody knows that. I will be going into some of the more obscure benefits of resistance training, kind of make it a little more interesting, a little more informative as I try to make these videos. That being the case, of course, as usual, there's a menu system after this introduction, and I encourage you to make full use of it. And if you don't want to watch the whole video and just want to get the highlights, then click on the summary section. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So the first things first, what is resistance training? As usual, I like to use an operational definition or get some sort of an idea. So in case you're not familiar with what resistance training is, which is probably unlikely, but if you are, then I've got you covered. Resistance training would be a type of training where you would try to enhance your muscular strength or just muscle size in general. Through an external force. So that could be, a few examples would be something like weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding, using resistance bands, calisthenics, things like that are all considered resistance training. Those all fall under the umbrella of resistance training. So, what are the physical benefits, the physiological benefits of resistance training? Let's go ahead and knock out the simplest one, the one that you probably already know, is if you're going to be doing resistance training, most likely your body will increase the amount of muscle that it has. Not necessarily in number, but in size. So the muscle size will increase, muscle strength will increase. But along with that, we can actually also add in, along with regular muscular adaptation, it's not like just the muscle increases. Actually, your tendons, which actually attach your muscles to your bones, which I will discuss next, those actually become far tougher as well. And when they get tougher, that actually helps you deliver force through your muscles. So not only are your muscles enlarging, not only are they getting stronger, but your tendons are also getting stronger, getting more dense. And that actually leads us to the other side. So we've got muscle, tendon, and then that attaches to bone. And resistance training has a significant impact on bone. You may have heard that resistance training helps in reducing osteoporosis, which is basically a loss of density in the bones, which then can eventually lead to breakage of the bones. And I'll kind of go over that a little bit more in a following section. But not only does it prevent against osteoporosis, but it can actually do the opposite. So it can actually help with bone density. So if you're going to be doing any sort of resistance training and using progressive overload, not only do your muscles have to enlarge, not only do your tendons have to become more forceful, do they have to become stiffer, but also your bones have to increase their density. They become more dense, become a little larger, and therefore they can hold more weight or more resistance, more load upon the body. So those are three kind of intertwined systems that absolutely see a massive benefit, massive like visual benefit from specifically the muscles and the skeletal system, visual benefit from resistance training. Now, on a little bit less talked about benefit of resistance training is neural adaptation. Neural adaptation, you might know, and it's kind of assumed that within the first few weeks of resistance training, most of the body's adaptation comes from actual neural adaptation, and that can actually lead to a better coordination, can lead to better motor neuron patterns, motor activity patterns while doing a certain activity, certain resistance training activity, can lead to better synchronicity between neurons. And just overall, the whole neural network becomes more efficient at training, at certain movements, and at innervating and activating muscle fibers. So that's certainly a way that resistance training, has an effect on neurals, the neural system, the neurons, neural adaptation. Another one is kind of in-depth physiological adaptation. Not that all these are physiological adaptations, but this one specifically, I don't really know how I would categorize it, so I'm just saying broadly it's a physiological adaptation, and that's blood glucose levels. We know that aerobic exercise, specifically long duration exercise, low intensity LISS, low intensity steady state cardio, has a profound effect on blood glucose levels, in reducing blood glucose levels and normalizing blood glucose levels. But actually, surprisingly enough, resistance training, although it doesn't have quite as much research behind it, the research that has been done on it seems to indicate that it also has a profound effect on blood glucose levels. Comparable? Maybe. I'd have to look at the research a little more, but definitely resistance training does have a positive impact on blood glucose levels. So it would be a great system, a great way of exercising for somebody who's diabetic, pre-diabetic, or really just anyone who's concerned about their blood glucose levels. So that's another adaptation, another positive adaptation. Finally, I wanted to quick talk about body composition. Again, kind of seems a little intuitive to assume that, okay, if you do resistance training, you're going to have improved body composition. But what exactly does that mean? That means that you have an increase in muscular size. I already kind of went over that. But on the flip side, it also means a decrease in adipose tissue, so fat, body fat. People consider that as like a recomposition, that's what it's called, where you kind of gain muscle and reduce body fat. Is it going to happen for the entirety of your resistance training career? Unlikely. But at the beginning, it's perfectly possible. Or if you are extremely good at sticking with your nutrition and know how to exercise at an advanced level, then it's maybe possible as well. You have to check out my video on that to find out if it really is possible. But in general, beginners definitely, it's pretty well known that they can recomposition even in spite of their nutrition. And in that case, again, you're going to be reducing body fat, which means that there's less of a continuous load on your body, on your system, on your skeletal system, muscular system, tendons, etc., etc. And then you're going to be adding more metabolically active tissue, muscle, of course, which uses more calories. And that is, of course, going to help. Again, this is kind of all in a cycle, it all works together. That's going to help in reducing your blood glucose levels, having more muscle. So those are a few things that physically resistance training has an impact on, has been proven to have an impact on. And there are a few other things that I left out, mainly because they're not quite as concrete. But if you'd like to know about them, then check out the article, which is linked below. Moving on. Well, while physiology is extremely interesting, probably more interesting to me than the degree that I got in psychology, or one of the degrees that I have in psychology, psychological health mental health is extremely important. Extremely important. And why just focus on the body when you should probably be focusing on your mental health just as much as your physical health? So I just went ahead and bit the bullet and did some research on how resistance training can aid in psychological well-being. And it turns out that resistance training has a profound impact in many different areas of psychology. So let's go into them. The first thing is anxiety. So if a person has general anxiety disorder, has just general anxiety issues, resistance training, specifically moderate resistance training, so we're talking about 8 to 12 repetitions, has the most impact on general anxiety. So resistance training does have published research saying that it does reduce anxiety. Now, another thing that it helps with is cognition. And this doesn't necessarily apply just to the younger population or middle-aged population. We're also talking about elderly population. What's really nice about that is, specifically for elderly population, is that resistance training has an effect on, or has an impact on, cognition in terms of knowledge acquisition and in memory. So it could, and probably there needs to be more research on this because it's a little bit gray, it's a little hard to make cause and effect with this, but it could have an impact on reducing the symptoms of dementia as well as holding off dementia in the long run. So for elderly populations, that's a big deal. And I mean, start early, and you'll have probably an even lower risk of having dementia, because resistance training does have an impact on both memory and knowledge acquisition, which is, those are two areas are huge. Next thing I'd like to quick cover is chronic fatigue, and this is actually really interesting. It doesn't seem like that huge of a psychological disorder, but actually it can be pretty debilitating. Okay, so chronic fatigue isn't something that necessarily is going to cause massive issues in your life, but if you're trying to be productive, yeah, chronic fatigue is going to be a big issue. And surprisingly, the research seems to indicate that resistance training is the most effective method of dealing with fatigue, chronic fatigue. Actually, there's even some evidence that says that it's even more effective than any pharmaceutical drug intervention. And that's pretty big. That's a massive deal. I can completely see how resistance training would have a profound impact, a really massive impact on chronic fatigue and keeping a person awake. But on the flip side, if we talk about sleep, it seems that resistance training also has a positive impact on sleep habits. So we're able to fall asleep quicker, stay asleep better, and has a specific impact on things like sleep apnea. People who resistance training seem to have a decrease in sleep apnea. And there are a whole bunch of different kind of smaller benefits as well related to sleep. So when you're awake, you're more alert than any other instance. And on the flip side, you're able to go to sleep for longer and uninterrupted sleep and have better sleep habits. So that's a big deal. Finally, the last two things I wanted to cover under psychology are self-esteem. That's the first thing. Self-esteem seems to go up, which, think about it. You look better, you feel better, you're lifting more weight, you're seeing these small incremental progressions, you're moving forward, you're going to feel better about yourself. So that's really not that much of a shock. Self-worth, self-esteem, self-efficacy, all those things seem to increase from resistance training. Now, on the other side, if you're down in the dumps and you're depressed, there is some research, and I should emphasize that, some research that indicates that yes, resistance training does have an impact, a positive impact on depression. So if you're depressed, maybe pick up weight training or pick up some sort of calisthenics or something along those lines, and it could have a boost. And actually the research that does say it has an impact actually say it has a quite enormous impact on depression, on decreasing depression. The studies that seem to be kind of on the fence seem to say that it doesn't have a negative impact on depression. It's not like you'll get more depressed from resistance training, but it may not have a significant impact on depression. So really, what do you have to lose? Nothing. That said, the theory between the discrepancy is because of the amount of prescription. So it's possible that maybe, a certain amount of resistance training is optimal for reducing depression, while another prescription, a certain amount of resistance training, might not have a significant impact. So there might in that realm, that might be the excuse as to why in certain cases it does help and in other cases it doesn't. But the research seems to steer towards yes, it does help. But again, if you'd like to look at the studies yourself, please, of course, check out the article below. Okay, so who benefits from resistance training? I mean, let's be real here, really everyone. Everyone benefits from resistance training, but that's not really much of an answer. It's not really an interesting answer. So let's break this down a little bit. Men obviously can benefit from resistance training, along with teenagers. I mean, a whole variety of different people, but specifically 2 to 3 groups focusing on resistance training would be really beneficial. And those 2 to 3 groups are, 1, women. While women are definitely going to the gym more and becoming more badasses when it comes to actually lifting heavy weights, which is fantastic, encouraging women to do more women to go to the gym and do that, or to pick up resistance bands or stay at home and do calisthenics, whatever it is. That will be a big benefit, specifically later on in life when menopause sets in and you have hormonal changes those hormones that would originally have protected that bone density, they start to decrease to a point where you might have some issues with bone density and osteoporosis. And as we know, resistance training has a strong impact on reducing osteoporosis risk. On another note, elderly folks should definitely consider resistance training. And I know most people probably are like, well, that might be a little bit dangerous. Well, not if it's done correctly. Not if it's done correctly. As a matter of fact, you'd probably see a massive improvement in life from resistance training. Because you have to think about it, elderly individuals, if they, again, I'm focusing on osteoporosis because it's a big deal, specifically for elderly folks. If you have some sort of fracture, if you end up with a fracture in your wrist, your hips, your legs, your back, I mean, imagine that, a fracture in your spine, that's a huge deal, or your hip, that reduces mobility. I mean, resistance training will not only attenuate sarcopenia, which is a decrease in muscle size and strength through aging. It will not only attenuate that, but so you'll have an increase in muscle mass, or at least be able to maintain muscle mass. You'll have a strength in tendons, you'll have strength in bones, to the point where you're able to keep your quality of life at a higher level, or at least maintain that level from minimal weight training, from minimal resistance training. And that's a huge deal because it'll keep people out of homes, well, not their homes, but like rest homes, where they constantly have to have supervision. They can still stay independent, and that's a huge deal. That really is. So it's certainly something to consider because of its impact on musculature and skeletal system, specifically for elderly individuals, because that can lead to a better level of independence, better quality of life, and just an overall happier sense. I mean, without even addressing psychological benefits. So that's another group, and of course, I mean, you probably could guess from psychological issues if you've got anxiety, if you've got depression. I mean, if you're just feeling in a funk, just pick up some weights and just see what happens, and slowly get into a rhythm, slowly get in a habit, and you will, hopefully, the science will prove true, and most likely it will, for you as well. So those are 3 groups that should definitely focus on resistance training. All right, so it's great to know all this information. It really is. But it doesn't really help you if you don't know where to start. So I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail, but I'm just going to go based off of very basic, rudimentary recommendations by the American College of Sports Medicine, who I am a personal trainer through them. I have my license through them. And my school, East Carolina, goes through them as well, so bases most of their recommendations off them, and they are kind of the gold standard when it comes to any sort of physiology, etc., etc. So American College of Sports Medicine recommends roughly about 2 to 3 times a week. Start out with 2, just do 2 times a week, and you're just going to be doing about 1 to 3 sets per muscle group. If you're doing 3 sets, just do less exercises, just do like 1 or 2 exercises. You're going to want to aim for roughly between 60 to 70% of your 1 rep maximum, which you can calculate theoretically, or you can actually try and do a 1 rep maximum. Depends on how you feel and what kind of population you are. And aiming for about 8 to 12 repetitions, maybe aiming for a little bit higher repetitions and lower weight or lower intensity for people who are elderly. And that will get you on the track to seeing all of these benefits that I've mentioned so far. And of course, as usual, you have to think nutrition plays a massive role in this as well, but resistance training is a great step forward in terms of your health. Yeah, that's it. Moving on. This is the summary of the video for those of you that need a quick recap. If not, please subscribe and check out the attached article. Okay, so welcome to the summary section if you didn't want to go through the entire video. So all in all, I kind of just discussed resistance training, the benefits of resistance training have on musculature. I'm not really going to go over that too much. I mean, resistance training increases strength, increases muscle growth in terms of size. You're also going to see benefits towards the tendons, so the actual connective tissue between the muscles and the bones. You're going to see them firm up and become less elasticity, have less elasticity. Another aspect, of course, is bone strength. You're going to have increased density in bones, which is extremely important for women and the elderly, because especially later on in life for women, but everyone when it comes to the elderly, because you want to avoid osteoporosis, and resistance training absolutely does attenuate to that osteoporosis. Having increased muscles and as well as tendons and skeletal system means that if you've got a stronger system, then most likely you can stay independent longer if you're an elderly person. On another note, of course, like neural adaptations, you're going to have vascular adaptations, but I didn't really talk about those too much, but of course you can just read the article. Other things like psychological benefits, there are of course psychological benefits to resistance training, a reduction in anxiety, general anxiety. You got a reduction in depression, most likely a reduction in depression. There is some conflicting research on that, but it does seem to point mostly towards, yes, it does have an impact on depression. As an increase in cognition, so your ability to acquire knowledge, ability to remember things, both of those increase, which is huge again for elderly individuals, and really just people who, well, I mean, if you have a fog over your mind, I mean, resistance training might help with that. Another aspect, of course, is having better self-esteem. If you're going to be resistance training, then you will most likely see an increase in self-esteem. You'll feel better about yourself, self-efficacy, self-worth. Another thing is sleep habits. Your sleep habits will get better. You'll probably be able to sleep longer. Extended periods of time. If you wake up every 2 to 3 hours, that'll probably kind of dissipate some because of resistance training, because you're putting such a load on your body and your body has to rest. On another note, chronic fatigue. It seems to be the most effective method for decreasing chronic fatigue and allowing your body to be more alert when it needs to be alert, while also being able to fall asleep quicker and have better sleep habits. So that's kind of a roundabout overall talk about what I just talked about throughout the whole video. If you'd like to know more details, of course, please check out the article that I wrote below, as well as all my sources. I think I've got like 20 plus sources for this article, so check it out. It will be linked below, as well as when the screen blacks out, you will see it pop up on the screen as well. If you found the information useful, please subscribe. It certainly motivates me to continue to come out with these videos and congruent articles. And with that said, I think we're done. I will see you next time. Have a good one.